How many times have you gotten into an argument with someone and failed miserably to change their mind even a little? People might tell you they have a secret to making you more persuasive, but there's no secret. Changing people's minds is really hard. I'll walk you through 3 research-backed principles, plus 1 bonus principle that explain why it's so hard to change people's minds. But stick around, because I'll also show you what the research suggests about how you can be more effective at changing people's minds. Number 1. Your arguments suck. Imagine trying to change someone's mind on immigration. It is possible. I mean, you probably couldn't do it, but it can be done. Let me explain. This is one of 10 issues researchers used in a recent study. They had about 130 ordinary people try to shift people's views in a short back-and-forth chat. They had people indicate their views before and after the conversation to see how their views shifted. Compared to a control where people chatted with ChatGPT about something unrelated, people moved on average about 5 points on a 100-point scale. So not that much, but some people were more persuasive. They also included a group of about 90 people who scored in the top 10% of a Persuasion tournament, and they also had a group of elite debaters, 56 of them. And these groups were more persuasive. The super persuaders moved people an average of about 7 points, and the elite debaters moved people an average of about 8 points. But one group beat even the elite debaters: AI. On average, AI moved people about 13 points on a 100-point scale. This was even though the debaters were allowed to choose their topics and were even paid to research the topics in advance. On average, they spent about 8 hours preparing. Why was AI more effective? The reason seemed to be that it was just really good at producing lots of credible facts. Researchers found that as more facts came up during the chat, the more people shifted their views. This study shows that people do listen to good arguments. In fact, sometimes it's really easy to change people's minds. For example, have you ever heard that you can see the Great Wall of China from space? Well, it's not true, it's a myth. And you can see for yourself. Just open up Google Earth, search for Great Wall of China, and zoom out a bit. Pretty soon there's no sign of it. If you believed this before, you probably don't anymore, and it didn't take much convincing. So why is it sometimes so easy to change people's minds and sometimes so hard? In the Persuasion study, even though ChatGPT is basically an omniscient fact generator, it still only shifted people's views 13%. This shows that sometimes even great arguments aren't enough. Why? That brings us to number 2. You're fighting their whole worldview. Consider an issue like abortion. Whatever your view is, it's likely tied up with other deeply held beliefs about things like personal autonomy and souls and women's rights and what a human life is. That's why it's really hard to change people's minds about most political issues, because to do that you'd have to change their entire worldview. A good example of this is a 2025 study. Researchers had about 100 US adults rate arguments about a bunch of politically charged topics, including legalizing abortion. Some were pro-arguments, some were con, some were strong arguments, and some contained logical flaws. The question was whether people could tell the good arguments from the bad arguments. And they could, but the difference was small. What mattered a lot more were their own views. Like, the more that someone thought abortion should be legalized, the more they tended to rate the pro-legalization arguments as high quality, even if they were bad arguments. So people do recognize good arguments, but for some issues they give more weight to their own beliefs. And there's another issue. This way of thinking implies that people would change their minds if they just recognized the truth. But what if they don't care about the truth? This brings us to number 3. You're threatening who they are. If you're choosing your next laptop, getting it right matters because you'll have to live with the consequences. But most people won't personally experience the consequences of getting it wrong about something like climate change. But you will have to experience the social consequences of disagreeing with your friends and family about an issue like that. This shows how, for many political issues, people may care more about fitting in than the truth. Consider this study from 2012. Researchers surveyed over 1,500 US adults. First, they gave them all a test of their science knowledge, and then they asked them how concerned they were about the risk from climate change. Here's what they found. The strongest predictor was people's underlying worldview, basically how they feel about social hierarchy and how much government should do to look out for the collective good. And as science knowledge went up, the gap between the groups grew slightly wider, not narrower, suggesting people were motivated more by identity than facts. And a study 5 years later largely replicated these results with thousands of responses on other issues like stem cell research and evolution. There's actually one more barrier to changing people's minds that's actually kind of sneaky and frustrating. Even if you do manage to change someone's minds, you may face this last problem. Your impact doesn't last. Check out this 2022 study. They had over 5,000 people in the US and Great Britain during the height of the COVID pandemic rate their belief in a bunch of COVID myths. Later, they read some articles debunking the myths and rate their beliefs again. Here's what they found. Their ratings went down by a lot. They dropped 30% in the US and 45% in Great Britain. But when they surveyed them only a month later, their scores had reverted back to where they started. This shows how people are sometimes willing to admit that they're wrong in the moment, but that doesn't mean they're going to change their minds permanently. Now, if you've made it this far, you might get the impression that it's impossible to change your mind. But I know that's not true because I've changed my mind on lots of things over the years. And I bet you have too. So let me know in the comments what has caused you to change your mind on something important. And I'm going to tell you about one more study, one of my favorites, that shows that changing people's minds on big issues really is possible. In a 2016 study, researchers worked with canvassers in Florida. About 500 people ended up coming to the door. Half of them had a conversation about recycling, half of them had a conversation about trans rights. And the main thing they had them do was had them remember a time that they themselves had been judged harshly for being different. The researchers did multiple follow-up surveys. People's feelings about trans people became more positive by about 10 points on a 100-point scale after this short 10-minute conversation, compared to the people who talked about recycling. And this change persisted for at least 3 months. Now, I think facts and logic are important, and the research supports this. I'm using facts and logic in this video. But one thing that sets this study apart is that they asked people to empathize and take the perspective of trans people rather than provide them with a bunch of facts and statistics about how trans people are treated unfairly. And it led to a pretty robust change. And one thing that makes these results so surprising is that the changes happened from just a 10-minute conversation. In general, though, if you want to change people's minds, you should lower your expectations. Most people's minds are not going to be changed from a single conversation. But you might be able to chip away slowly at their views from multiple conversations by gradually and incrementally changing their views over time. I think changing someone's mind is one of the most powerful things you can do. That's why it's so important to know how to do it effectively.